The sound of chains, the crack of a whip, then silence. Under the blistering sun of Texas, a young girl stood barefoot on the wooden platform, her wrists bound by rusted iron. The crowd stared at her like they were choosing livestock. The auctioneer grinned. Sweat ran down his neck. Even 4 years after the Civil War ended slavery, shadowy auctions like this still thrived in hidden barns, where desperate folks were sold off like old debts to evade the law. Next one, 17. No husband, no family. Been sold 3 times already. Won't talk, won't work. $5 to start. In a time when folks valued strong backs for farm labor, a silent girl like her seemed useless. Too broken by the war's aftermath to fetch more than a few coins. No one spoke. A man in the front spat in the dirt. Not worth a single dime. The girl's name was Lena Cartwright. Her dress hung in tatters, dust clinging to her skin. Her hair stuck to her face, hiding the bruise on her cheek. She stared at the ground, unmoving. She had stopped crying long ago. Crying never changed anything here. Then a voice, calm, deep, steady. "I'll pay 20. Heads turned. At the back of the crowd, a man in a faded brown coat stood with a handful of crumpled bills. His name was Grant McCade, 56 years old. Gray stubble on his jaw. A man who looked like he hadn't smiled in a decade. The auctioneer blinked. 20? You sure? Mr. Grant nodded once. The gavel slammed down. Sold. Lena didn't move. She didn't even look at him. Grant stepped closer, pulling off his hat. When he saw her face clearly, his heart stopped. That scar, a small crescent on her wrist 8 years ago. He had wrapped that wound himself. He remembered the little girl hiding behind her father's leg, asking if it would leave a mark. He had told her no, he had lied. The auctioneer shoved Lena forward. Grant caught her before she fell. Her skin was burning hot. She looked up at him for the first time, her eyes green but hollow. He whispered her name, Lena. Her expression didn't change. A flicker crossed her eyes like a half-buried memory from before the war stole everything. But she pushed it down. Folks in her shoes learned fast not to trust old faces. She didn't remember him. Or maybe she did and wished she didn't. Outside, the wind carried the sound of the gavel echoing again. Another life sold, another soul gone. Grant led her away from the barn without a word. The crowd already losing interest as coins changed hands and another name was called. But Lena felt the pull of his grip, firm and strangely careful, not like the others who had dragged her before. And though her feet stumbled on the dirt, she did not resist. Because resistance had only ever brought pain. Outside, the sun struck her eyes, and she flinched, the smell of horses and dust thick in her throat. And Grant paused long enough to loosen the iron from her wrists, the chains falling with a dull clatter that made her shoulders tense, waiting for the whip that never came. "You're free of that now," he said quietly, not as an order, not as a promise, just a fact. And she did not answer, because words had been beaten out of her long ago. He lifted her into the wagon as if she weighed nothing, laid an old blanket around her shoulders, and drove away while the barn shrank behind them like a bad dream that refused to die. Miles passed in silence, broken only by the creak of wheels, and the distant cry of cicadas, and Lena watched the road with empty eyes, certain that kindness was just another trick with sharper teeth. Grant's hands shook on the reins, his mind racing through memories he had buried under years of loss. The war, the graves, the promises he had failed to keep, and every glance at her scar felt like a wound reopening in his chest. At his small homestead, a weathered house standing alone against the open land, he helped her down and pointed to a basin of water, stepping back to give her space. And when she washed the dirt from her hand, she stared at the clear skin, beneath like it belonged to someone else. Inside, he set food on the table and left the room, and hunger finally won over fear as she ate with trembling fingers, each bite slow, measured, ready to be taken away. Night fell, and she slept on the floor by the hearth, curled tight, waking at every sound. But no footsteps came, no shouting, only the steady crackle of fire and the wind outside. Days followed much the same, Grant speaking little, never raising his voice, never touching her unless she was about to fall. And something inside Lena began to loosen. A knot she had forgotten was there. One evening, as the sun bled red across the fields, he placed a small mirror in front of her and said softly, "You're safe here, Lena. No one owns you." And the words struck deeper than any blow, her breath hitching as tears finally came, silent and unstoppable, washing away years of numbness. She did not fully remember the man he once was to her, but she felt something else instead. A fragile thread of trust, thin as spider silk, stretching toward a future she had never believed she deserved. And for the first time since the war, the night did not feel endless.